Okay, here's the second part of the Intro to VBA. So we're going to be looking at validating input data and looking at how to do option groups. So first thing is just to compare to Python, the if-else structure for Visual Basic is similar to Python, which you did. In this case, the typical problem of age, if the person's 13, they're a teenager, if they're 18, they're an adult, that sort of thing. So in Visual Basic, it's if, just like the regular if, age equals 13, and test for equivalency is a single equal sign in Visual Basic. Then, so we do a message box, you are a teenager. And anything else that would be in there would be the case that the user is 13 years old. And else if is spelt fully else if as opposed to Python, which is elif, right? E-L-I-F. In Visual Basic, it's else if. Age equals 18, then, case for the you're an adult. Else if age is 19 or, so there's how you do an or statement in Visual Basic. Age is 21, then you can drink legally. And the else, the dangling else on the end, message box, you must be over the hill. And then an end if overall. So that's the if-else structure. So another thing we're going to have to learn how to do in this part is the input from the text box that we're going to get has to be tested that it's a valid number. If the user types ABC, the program's going to crash. So we want to make sure that the data that they put in the text box, so here's an example of a text box called text my input data and the text property for the text box. So we use the function called isNumeric to test to see if it's a valid number. And so if the user entered a number like 5 or -2 or 5.3, that would all be valid numbers. But if they type 5.3 ABC, that would be not a valid number. So this test will return true if it is a valid number. So we message box the number is good. If it returns false, well, then we would do the else condition and we would message that the number is bad. So in the next problem, you're going to have to test this number, linear feet, to make sure that it is a valid number, because in the requirements, so looking through the PowerPoint here, it says down here, requirements, if the user enters a non-numeric value for linear feet, you have to advise them that there's a problem so you can display a message box. So just to show you how to do that kind of logic, let me just fire up Notepad, and I'll just type it in. So for example, let's say we have, let's say the user has a text box called text my input. So you can do if, there's all kinds of ways to do it. One way you could say if, you could say str my input is equal to, and we'll get the text value from the text box. So text user input dot text. So that will get the whatever the user put in the text box and put it in that string my input. So now we can test that variable if, and we'll use isNumeric function, and it's a function so we need round parentheses str my input. So if that is true, then and I'll indent just for quality, just to make it easier to read. I'll say if it's good, then we can test to see, we can then convert it to a number. So then I could say an integer variable my input is equal to, and we can go val, which will give the value of the string number, string my input. Okay, so that gets, we can't do that if it's a non-numeric value. If we do that, if it's non-numeric, the program will crash. But this will only run, this val conversion will only execute if the number is a valid number. Now we have to test to see if it's greater than 0, because you can't allow for a negative input for this application. So now we're going to have to say if int my input is greater than 0, then, so now we're in a situation where we've got good input. Now we can actually say int cost is equal to int my input times int cost per foot. So int cost per foot is a variable that you would have to assign a value based on which one of these buttons the user chose. Because pine, oak, and cherry all have a different cost per foot. And to see the program requirements, the cost per foot for the different types of wood, pine is $150 a foot, oak is $200, and cherry is $350. So $150, $200, or $350. So you would assign to this variable cost per foot a value of $150, $200, or $350 up above. So you have to test the radio buttons, and I'll show you how to do that shortly. Okay, so that's how that works, and then you have to do the else condition for both of these ifs. Else, so this is if the number is negative, you want to say message box, enter a non-negative value for feet. And then we're done that end that condition, so we can do our end if. And then we have to do the else for the outer if statement, right? This is a nested if statement condition. The outer if statement is if we're testing for a valid number. So this is what we do if it is valid. If it's invalid, we come down here and we say message box, enter a valid number for feet. And then we can do an end if. So that's one example of how to validate the user input. So it'll only do these calculations if the number is numeric, and this will only be done if the number is numeric and it's a valid number and it's greater than 0. So numeric and greater than 0. Okay? And that's the same as Python as far as how nested if statements work, which you have done. So the other thing you have to do is how to do these. You need to know how to do these option buttons, these option groups called radio buttons. So in order to do an option group, each radio button in a group has a value 1, 2, or 3. That's the default. In order to determine which button is selected, you have to test the value property of the option group. So here's an example of option group, 3, pine, oak, and cherry, and a button that says push me. So the group is called group wood type, and the way we test it is, I've got an example here, over here on the right, that says output a message box based on the option group type, based on its value. So in this case, we're outputting it, and we get a 1. See the message box there? Down here, we're doing it, and we get a 3 because the user selected cherry. So I can demonstrate that. Let me see if I can do this. So here's my button, and I'll now do an option group. So you have to open these up, and the option group is, oh, it's right there. Yeah. So let's do the option group. Now, when you first start up the option group for access, it allows you to put the label names in. So let's do pine, oak, and cherry for the wood types. And I'll go next. And it says, do I want a default choice? Yeah, sure, pine would be the default. Otherwise, you can pick no, and then none would be selected by default, but we'll just say yes, why not? And these are the values. By default, pine will have a value of 1, oak will have a value of 2, and cherry will have a value of 3. And then you can choose, what type of controls, just the defaults are fine. And the caption for the option group, that's the label that's at the top, and we want it to say wood type. And then we're finished. And there's our option group. And wood type is the label, pine, oak, and cherry. So when I run that, it looks like this, wood type, pine, oak, and cherry. Now I can go and change background colors and all that sort of thing and the properties for that, which is fine. I'm not going to do that now. I'll let you do that. Okay, so as far as the button goes, let's go and look at the properties for the button. Let's make sure we have it named properly. We don't, we'll call it BTN Click Me, standard default name. And so now we want to go and look at the code. So event on click procedure ... And here's where we want to test our option group. If, oh, let me make sure I named, did I name the group properly? No, I didn't. I didn't name the option group. Right, so the way you name the option group, to select the option group, you select the frame. Don't select the label, select the frame. Name it other GRP wood type. Okay, good. So now back to my code. If GRP wood type dot, and here's all my properties come up for the option group, and its value, there's value, is equal to 1. Then message box, you selected pine. Else if group wood type dot value. So what I can do is I'm going to copy and paste instead. So 1, 2, 3. So this is going to be my dangling else on the end, with no if and then. So here we go. So if group type value equals 1, then message box you selected pine. Else if group type dot value equals 2, then you selected oak. Else it's none of the above, therefore the user selected cherry, right? And end if. Let's just go without the end if. If I run this, it'll give me an error. So let me go to run it. And I'll pick cherry command, and it says compile error, block if without end if. So that's what happens when you forget to put in the end if. I'm going to stop it and go back to access and run it again. So now if I pick pine and hit the button, it says message box, you selected pine. If I pick cherry, that's the default. It says you selected cherry, oak, and it says you selected oak. Okay, so that's the option group. So that's how you do those. So now you can do the rest of the assignments. This one is the wood cabinet estimate program, which looks like this and allows the user to put in linear feet, and it will calculate pine, oak, or cherry. So text box, some labels, an option group, label, an output label, and you have to use the format currency, and a clear to clear the text box, and then project 2 is a parking violation, where you don't have any text box input. You just have an option group of 4 and then another radio button down here for repeat offender, and a picture, a label, and another label with currency format. Okay, and the depending which option group the user chose, these are the values for the fine. Oh, there go my clocks. 9 o'clock in the morning. Oh boy. Okay, and this describes the use case for it. So that's about it.